Dust was all that remained of the Higgins Centennial Farm. After 112 days without rain, the soil shifted like hot talcum powder, mocking the withered skeletons of the corn crop. 48 hours stood between 71-year-old Martha Higgins and the bank's foreclosure notice. Yet, she chose iron over surrender. While her grandson, Caleb, begged her to sign the surrender papers and flee, Martha grabbed a grease-stained wrench and marched toward the locked barn. Silence hung over the property until she roared, "That junk can't save us. Just watch." The soil of Oak Haven, Nebraska, hadn't just dried out. It had surrendered. It sifted through Martha Higgins's calloused fingers like hot talcum powder, entirely devoid of the rich, loamy moisture that had sustained her family for 3 generations. It was mid-August, and it had been 112 days since the last drop of rain fell on the Higgins Centennial Farm. All around her, 2,000 acres of corn stood like rows of brittle, sun-bleached skeletons. The wind offered no relief, blowing across the plains like the exhaust from a massive furnace. "Error code 404, Caleb muttered, kicking the massive $500,000 irrigation pivot that sat paralyzed in the middle of the dying field. He threw his tablet onto the dusty hood of his pickup truck, running a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. At 24, Caleb carried the weight of the farm's modern debts on his young shoulders, and right now, that weight was crushing him. "The proprietary software needs a firmware update to recalibrate the water flow sensors, Grandma. But the local cell tower has been down for 2 days because of the rolling blackouts. The system is entirely locked out. We have an ocean of water in the municipal reserves, but this $100,000 piece of garbage won't pump a single gallon without corporate authorization." Martha adjusted her faded denim cap, her sharp blue eyes scanning the desolate horizon. "I told your father and I told you, Caleb. When you lease the tractor and you lease the software, you don't own the farm anymore. The farm owns you. It's the 21st century, Grandma. You can't run 2,000 acres on spit and a prayer." Caleb shot back, his voice cracking with desperation. He pointed toward the county highway, where a sleek, black Cadillac Escalade was kicking up a trail of white dust, heading straight for their driveway. "And here comes the Reaper." The Escalade pulled up to the farmhouse, the tinted windows rolling down with a quiet hum to release a blast of heavily air-conditioned air. Out stepped Thomas Randall. Randall wasn't a farmer, though he owned more agricultural land than anyone else in the tri-state area. He was the regional acquisitions director for Omni Crop Holdings, a massive agribusiness conglomerate that specialized in buying up distressed, multi-generational family farms for pennies on the dollar. Randall adjusted his expensive sunglasses and smiled, a thin, predatory expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Martha, Caleb, it breaks my heart to see the corn looking like this. Absolutely tragic." "You look about as heartbroken as a fox in a henhouse, Thomas," Martha said, crossing her arms over her flannel shirt. "Will you, Sheik, state your business and get off my dirt?" Randall sighed, adopting a tone of faux sympathy as he pulled a crisp, manila folder from his leather briefcase. "I'm trying to throw you a lifeline, Martha. I just got off the phone with Arthur Pendleton down at First National Bank. You missed your 3rd consecutive mortgage payment. You owe the bank $450,000, and Arthur's hands are tied. Foreclosure proceedings begin at 5 p.m. this Friday. You have exactly 48 hours before the county sheriff locks the gates." Caleb flinched, looking away. He already knew. "Omni Crop is willing to absorb your debt," Randall continued smoothly, tapping the folder. "We will pay off First National, and we'll give you a generous $75,000 in cash to walk away. You can buy a nice little condo in Omaha. Caleb here can get a job managing one of our automated drone fleets. It's a dignified exit, Martha, because let's face it, this land is dead, your equipment is bricked, and you are out of time." $75,000 for land my grandfather cleared with a team of mules and an axe? Martha's voice was dangerously quiet. "This farm is appraised at nearly $3 million, Thomas." "Not when the crops are dead and the bank is holding the hammer," Randall sneered, the friendly facade finally dropping. "It's a desert, Martha. By Monday this land belongs to the bank, and I'll buy it from Arthur Pendleton at auction for half of what I'm offering you now. I'm trying to do you a favor." He tossed the folder onto the hood of Caleb's truck. "Sign it by tomorrow night, or leave with nothing. Your choice." Randall got back into his freezing car and sped away, leaving a cloud of choking dust in his wake. Silence descended on the farm, broken only by the dry, rattling whisper of the dead corn stalks in the wind. Caleb picked up the folder. His hands were shaking. "Grandma, we have to sign it. 75,000 is better than bankruptcy. The automated systems are dead. The well is running dry. We fought hard, but we lost." Martha walked over to her grandson, her hands mapped with the scars of 50 years of mechanical labor and harsh winters, gently took the folder from his grip. She didn't open it. Instead, she tore the thick contract in half, and then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the dead earth. "Grandma, are you out of your mind?" Caleb yelled, his voice echoing across the empty yard. "What are you going to do? Pray for rain. First National is taking the house on Friday." Martha turned her gaze toward the back of the property, where a massive, corrugated iron barn sat in the shadow of a dying oak tree. The doors had been padlocked shut for nearly a decade, ever since her husband William had passed away from a sudden heart attack. "No," Martha said softly, a hardened resolve igniting in her chest. "I'm not going to pray for rain, Caleb. I'm going to pull it out of the bedrock." "The bedrock?" Caleb scoffed, throwing his hands in the air. "The geological survey said the lower aquifer dried up 20 years ago. Omnicrop's deep drilling lasers couldn't even penetrate the granite shelf beneath us. We don't have the tech, we don't have the money, and we sure don't have the time." Martha didn't look back as she began walking toward the rusted iron doors of the old barn. "I don't need their shiny corporate technology," she called over her shoulder. "I need steel, diesel, and compression." Caleb ran after her, grabbing her arm. "Grandma, stop. That junk in the barn can't save us. Grandpa spent 5 years building that monstrous thing, and it never worked. It's a rusted pile of scrap." Martha yanked her arm free, her blue eyes flashing with a fierce, terrifying energy that Caleb hadn't seen since he was a little boy. "Your grandfather didn't finish it," Martha said quietly. "But I did. Now go fetch me the master key from the kitchen boy. It's time to wake up the monster." The heavy iron padlock protested with a loud, metallic shriek as Martha forced the heavy brass key into its rusted chamber. With a sharp crack, it gave way. She unspooled the heavy iron chains, wrapping the barn's double doors, and pushed. The hinges groaned, sending a cascade of dust and spiderwebs falling from the rafters as the afternoon sun pierced the gloom of the massive structure for the first time in 10 years. The air inside smelled of oxidized iron, dried oil, and the ghostly scent of William's cherrywood pipe tobacco. Sitting in the center of the cavernous barn, hidden beneath 3 massive canvas tarps, was a machine that defied modern agricultural logic. Caleb stood in the doorway, coughing as the dust settled, staring at the monolithic silhouette. "You can't be serious," Caleb whispered. Martha grabbed the edge of the heavy canvas and pulled with all her might. The tarp slid away, revealing the beast beneath. It was an unholy amalgamation of industrial machinery, pieced together over 2 decades of obsessive, secretive labor. The base was a heavily modified 1978 Steiger Panther tractor, stripped of its original green paint and reinforced with welded, military-grade steel plating. But it was what William and Martha had built onto the tractor that made it terrifying. Mounted to the rear was a massive skeletal derrick, a towering rotary and percussion drilling rig salvaged from a defunct 1960s Texas oil field. Instead of the delicate computer-guided laser drills that modern corporations used, this rig was equipped with a monstrous tungsten carbide drill bit the size of a small car, designed to literally smash through solid granite using sheer kinetic force. Powering this mechanical titan was a salvaged V12 diesel engine pulled from a decommissioned locomotive mounted directly behind the driver's cab. William called it the Earthbreaker, Martha said, running a weathered hand along the cold steel of the massive drill bit. The corporate geologists used ground-penetrating radar and told us the lower Oakhaven aquifer was gone. William knew they were wrong. He studied the old 19th century typography maps. There is an underground reservoir the size of Lake Michigan trapped beneath a 40-foot shelf of solid granite under this farm. The modern drills shatter because they spin too fast and overheat on the quartz deposits. But this doesn't finesse the rock, it pulverizes it. Grandma, it's a museum piece, Caleb argued, stepping into the barn. It hasn't been turned on in 10 years. The seals are probably rotted, the fuel lines are choked, and even if by some miracle it starts, you don't have the strength to operate those manual clutch levers. You're 71 years old. I rebuilt the transmission myself the year after he died, Martha snapped, grabbing a heavy canvas tool bag from a nearby workbench. She pulled out a wrench and a can of industrial degreaser. I replaced the hydraulic seals. I kept the cylinders oiled. I just never had a reason to fire it up because the rains always came. But the rain isn't coming this time. Caleb watched in stunned silence as his grandmother, a woman who usually spent her evenings knitting and watching Jeopardy, hoisted herself up the side of the massive machine with the agility of a woman 20 years her junior. She popped the heavy steel hood, revealing the monstrous V12 engine. "Grab that hand crank primer on the fuel pump," Martha ordered, pointing with her wrench. "We need to cycle the diesel from the auxiliary tank. Move, Caleb. We have 47 hours. Despite his skepticism, the sheer authority in her voice compelled him to act. Caleb climbed up the opposite side of the machine, his hands gripping the cold, oily steel of the primer crank. He began to turn it, his muscles straining against the heavy suction of the ancient fuel lines. For the next 8 hours, they worked in a frantic, sweaty blur. Martha was a maestro of mechanical resurrection. She bled the brake lines, flushed the massive radiator with water from their dwindling farmhouse reserve, and tightened the monstrous fan belts with a heavy steel pry bar. Her knuckles bled, and grease stained her face like war paint. But she didn't slow down. Word spread fast in a small town, like Oakhaven. By nightfall, headlights began sweeping down the Higgins driveway. Neighbors, local farmers, and curious townspeople gathered at the edge of the property, drawn by the sounds of heavy clanking and the rumor that Martha Higgins had finally lost her mind. Even Sheriff Boyd Jenkins showed up, parking his cruiser near the barn. He leaned against his car, sipping coffee from a thermos as he watched Caleb and Martha work under the glare of harsh halogen work lights. "Martha," Sheriff Boyd called out gently, "you're making a lot of noise out here. Arthur Pendleton called me. He's worried you're trying to strip the property of assets before the foreclosure. What exactly are you doing with that thing?" Martha wiped her forehead with the back of her greasy arm, looking down from the top of the drilling rig. "I'm saving my farm, Boyd. Tell Arthur he can have the land if I don't pay him by Friday. Until then, he can sit on his hands." Just then, Thomas Randall's black Escalade returned, parking aggressively next to the sheriff's cruiser. Randall stepped out, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. He looked at the towering, rusted machine and burst into loud, mocking laughter. "Is this a joke?" Randall shouted, his voice echoing in the still night air. "You tore up my contract for a junkyard parade float? Look at that rust bucket. That junk can't save us, Martha. It belongs in a scrapyard, just like this farm." Martha tightened the last bolt on the intake manifold. She didn't look at Randall. She didn't look at the whispering crowd. She looked at Caleb, who was standing by the massive tires, looking exhausted and humiliated by the town stairs. "Caleb," Martha said quietly, but with a voice of iron, "get in the cab." Caleb hesitated. "Grandma." "Get in the cab." Caleb scrambled up the ladder and slid into the worn leather seat. The dashboard looked like the cockpit of a World War II bomber. Dozens of analog dials heavy toggle switches, and thick brass levers. Martha climbed in beside him, taking the driver's seat. She flipped a sequence of heavy toggle switches. The battery relays clicked loudly, sending power to the massive starter motor. "Randall thinks the world belongs to the people who hold the paper," Martha whispered, wrapping her calloused hands around the steering wheel. "Let's remind him who actually built it." She grabbed the heavy ignition lever and pulled it down with all her strength. For a terrifying, agonizing 5 seconds, nothing happened. Just a low, whining grind of the starter motor struggling against the immense compression of the cold engine. Randall's laughter grew louder outside. Caleb squeezed his eyes shut. Whirr, grind or cough. Martha didn't let go. She slammed her foot on the mechanical throttle pedal, pumping raw diesel into the massive cylinders. Bang! A deafening explosion echoed from the heavy exhaust stacks, shooting a 6-foot plume of black smoke into the night sky. The crowd outside jumped back in terror. Suddenly, the V12 locomotive engine caught. It didn't just start, it erupted. The sound was apocalyptic, a deep, guttural, earth-shaking roar that rattled the windows of the police cruiser and sent a physical shockwave through the ground. The heavy iron chassis vibrated with terrifying power, and the massive floodlights mounted on the top of the derrick flickered to life, bathing the dying cornfields in a blinding, defiant white light. Inside the cab, the noise was deafening. Caleb's eyes were wide with shock, his hands gripping the dashboard as the analog's dials sprang to life, needles burying themselves in the green zones. Martha looked over at her grandson, a wild, victorious grin breaking through the grease on her face. She reached up and grabbed the heavy pneumatic horn cord. A blast loud enough to wake the next county ripped through Oak Haven, completely drowning out Thomas Randall's laughter. The 71-year-old farmer threw the massive transmission into gear, and the earthbreaker lurched forward out of the barn, ready to tear open the ground. The ground beneath Oak Haven, Nebraska, had not felt such violence since the ancient glaciers carved the Great Plains. The earthbreaker tore through the brittle, sun-bleached fields, its massive agricultural tires crushing the dead corn stalks into a fine, choking dust. Martha Higgins wrestled the heavy, unassisted steering wheel of the roaring Leviathan. Her shoulders ached with every brutal jolt, but she expertly guided the machine toward Miller's Hollow. This natural depression at the southern edge of the property was the absolute lowest elevation on the farm, and according to her late husband's meticulously hand-drawn typography maps, the thinnest point of the subterranean granite shelf. Caleb clung desperately to the passenger grab handle, his eyes darting frantically between the rapidly rising temperature gauges and the sheer drop of the hollow approaching in the high beams. "Grandma, the coolant pressure is spiking dangerously high," Caleb yelled, his voice barely cutting over the deafening roar of the salvaged V12 locomotive engine. "If we push it too hard before we even start the actual drilling, the radiator is going to blow its seals. She needs to run hot to thin the industrial oil for the derrick hydraulics," Martha shouted back, never taking her sharp blue eyes off the rough terrain. "Hold on tight, we're dropping the anchor." Martha slammed both of her work boots onto the heavy pneumatic air brakes. The massive machine skidded, the towering tungsten carbide drill bit swinging violently before finally settling over the exact mathematical center of Miller's Hollow. Immediately, she began flipping the heavy brass power takeoff switches, transferring the locomotive engine's immense, terrifying torque from the driving wheels directly to the drilling derrick. By the time the trailing parade of headlights reached the ridge above the hollow, Martha had already engaged the primary winch. The crowd of curious neighbors and townspeople poured out of their pickup trucks. Sheriff Boyd Jenkins arrived moments later, his cruiser's lights flashing red and blue against the dust, with Thomas Randall hot on his heels. Randall marched straight up to the sheriff, his face flushed with anger. "Boyd, this is an illegal, unpermitted industrial excavation. Omnicrop holds the adjacent corporate mineral rights, and that archaic, rusted monstrosity is a massive public hazard. Shut her down right now. Sheriff Jenkins rested his hand casually on his duty belt, watching the 71-year-old woman climb nimbly onto the rusted drilling platform. He spat a sunflower seed into the dry dirt. Martha's operating on her own deeded land, Thomas, and last I checked the county charter, digging a water well for agricultural use in Oak Haven County doesn't require a municipal permit if the farm was officially established before 1930. The Higgins family farm was deeded in 1898. She's within her rights. See, she's gonna kill someone with that junk, Randall shrieked, pointing at the towering rig. Only if you stand directly underneath it, Boyd replied calmly, crossing his arms. Up on the platform, Martha grabbed the master engagement lever. She looked down at Caleb, who had nervously taken his position at the secondary hydraulic pressure valves. "Drop the heavy hammer," Martha roared into the night. Caleb pulled the release cord. The massive tungsten carbide bit, weighing over 4 tons, plummeted. It struck the hard-pan soil with a concussive, earth-shattering shockwave that physically knocked Thomas Randall off his feet. The drill didn't spin smoothly like modern, corporate laser-guided rigs. It pulverized everything in its path. The crude percussion mechanism lifted and slammed the massive bit into the earth twice every second, while the rotary gear chewed the fractured soil. Boom, boom, boom. The ground shook violently. Dust plumed into the night air like volcanic ash. For the first 2 grueling hours, the downward progress was terrifyingly fast. They chewed through 60, then 90, then 120 feet of dry, compacted clay and brittle limestone. The engine screamed, spewing thick, black diesel soot into the starlit sky. But at exactly 1:15 a.m., at a depth of precisely 148 feet, the earthbreaker hit the solid granite shelf. The sound changed instantly from a rhythmic thud to a high-pitched, agonizing metallic shriek that forced the entire crowd on the ridge to cover their ears in pain. The entire machine violently bucked into the air. Caleb was thrown hard against the steel safety railing. "We hit the bedrock," Caleb screamed, his face pale with terror. The gauges on his control panel were all buried deep in the red zone. "Grandma, the vibration is tearing the chassis apart. The derrick is buckling." Martha's bare hands bled as she gripped the violently vibrating control sticks, desperately trying to modulate the immense hydraulic pressure. "Don't you dare back off the main throttle, Caleb. Give it more juice. We have to crack the crust." Crack. A sound like a military cannon shot echoed through the hollow. A massive geyser of scalding hot hydraulic fluid erupted from the primary pressure line, spraying violently across the side of the towering derrick. The percussion hammer froze instantly in place. The V12 engine revved completely out of control, freed from the immense subterranean resistance, until Martha frantically slammed the emergency kill switch. Silence crashed down over Miller's Hollow. The only sound was the sickening hiss of boiling engine fluids and the quiet, deeply mocking chuckle of Thomas Randall echoing from the ridge. "Well, I guess that's that," Randall announced loudly to the watching crowd, dusting off his expensive suit. "The junk finally broke. You had your fun, Martha. Now pack it up. The bank takes the keys at exactly 5 p.m. today." Caleb stared at the cleanly severed, broken hydraulic hose, his heart sinking rapidly into his empty stomach. The vital fluid was pooling uselessly in the dry dirt. He felt entirely defeated. "We do not have a spare line anywhere on the property. We cannot fix this. Grandpa never actually meant for this machine to work. It is over." Martha silently climbed down from the operator seat. She walked past Caleb, grabbed a heavy brass flashlight, and meticulously inspected the blown hose. Her face was a fierce mask of soot, grease, sweat, and absolute unwavering iron defiance against the corporate odds. She reached deep into her canvas tool bag and pulled out a heavy hacksaw, a thick spool of industrial steel binding wire, and 2 oversized clamps. If you think a busted rubber hose is going to take my family farm, Caleb, you do not know the iron blood running in your own veins, Martha growled fiercely. Your grandfather built this entire machine from discarded scraps. We will fix it with scraps. For the next 3 agonizing hours, in the dead of night, Martha and Caleb fought a desperate, exhausting battle against the crippled machine to save their dying family farm. Martha commanded Caleb to cut a section of the hollow steel railing as straight from the massive tractor catwalk. Using a portable torch, she carefully welded the hollow steel pipe directly into the 2 severed ends of the critical hydraulic line. She wrapped the entire patched section in thick rubber salvaged from an old tire, finally securing it with braided steel wire and heavy clamps. It was the ultimate definition of a terrifying, highly volatile improvised fix. The sun slowly began to peak over the eastern horizon, casting a deep red, ominous glow over the desolate, cracked dirt of Oak Haven, Nebraska. It was Friday morning. The clock was ticking mercilessly toward the morning bank foreclosure deadline. Arthur Pendleton, the anxious bank manager, had just arrived at the ridge in his sedan, standing nervously next to Thomas Randall. "Martha," Arthur called down, nervously checking his gold pocket watch. "Please stop this madness immediately. You are destroying your own property value." Martha completely ignored him. She looked squarely at Caleb. "When I start the engine, that rig patch is going to hold exactly 10,000 pounds of raw pressure. If it blows again, it is going to take my old head clean off." "Grandma, I will operate the derrick," Caleb pleaded, his voice shaking with genuine fear. "Let me do it." "No," Martha said softly, gently touching his dirty cheek with her greasy hand. "William built this dream for me. I'm going to finish it. You get into the cab and hold the main clutch down. When I signal you, you drop it, all of it." Martha bravely strapped herself back into the derrick operator seat, situated terrifyingly close to the heavily patched hydraulic line. Caleb reluctantly climbed into the main cab. She fired the heavy ignition, roaring to absolute mechanical life. Martha steadily pushed the hydraulic levers. The patched line bulged violently under the strain, the braided steel wire creaking, but miraculously, it held its ground. "Now, Caleb!" Martha screamed at the top of her lungs. Caleb dumped the heavy clutch. The entire, unbridled force of the massive locomotive engine hit the percussion drill. The huge tungsten bit slammed mercilessly into the hard granite shelf. Boom! The rig violently shuddered, threatening to entirely tear itself apart. Boom! The dry ground visibly cracked beneath their feet. The rubber patch hissed loudly, a fine mist of burning hot oil spraying across her face. She did not even flinch. She pushed the main throttle to maximum capacity, completely bypassing the engine's safety governors. The engine screamed a deafening metallic wail of pure agony. Boom! Crack! A sound entirely distinct from the mechanical hammering echoed from deep within the earth. A deep, hollow, resonant groan, acting exactly as if a sleeping subterranean titan had just forcefully woken up. Suddenly, the immense grinding resistance against the tungsten drill bit simply vanished. The massive iron shaft plummeted freely downward into the dark earth, dropping 20 feet in less than a single second. The engine redlined dangerously fast. Martha immediately slammed the master electrical kill switch. The screaming engine died. The thick dust settled slowly over Miller Hollow. The morning air became entirely, terrifyingly still. Up on the ridge, Thomas Randall began to laugh hysterically again. She punched straight through into an empty cavern. "Oh, this is absolutely priceless. You just dug yourself a very expensive, very deep grave, Martha." Caleb climbed down from the cab, hot tears of utter frustration stinging his exhausted eyes. He looked over at his grandmother. Martha was staring intently at the dark bore hole, standing perfectly still like a frozen stone statue. "Grandma," Caleb whispered softly. Then everyone heard it. It started as a remarkably low, rumbling hiss beneath the ground, perfectly imitating the sound of a rapidly approaching freight train. The rumble grew exponentially louder, powerfully vibrating up through the thick soles of their leather work boots. The loose dirt around the iron casing pipe began to physically dance. "Get back!" Martha ordered sharply, firmly grabbing his arm and yanking him forcefully away from the rusted rig. A terrifying, explosive roar erupted directly from the drill shaft. Randall instantly stopped laughing. Sheriff Boyd took a quick, frightened step completely backward. A massive column of pure, freezing water exploded violently from the borehole. Driven by immense geological pressure, the spectacular geyser shot 80 feet into the sky, blowing the massive drill bit out like a toy. The gathered townspeople erupted into deafening, joyous cheers. Stained work hats were thrown exuberantly into the air. Crying neighbors embraced each other tightly. Martha Higgins stood proudly in the torrential downpour, completely drenched to the bone. She slowly walked up the muddy embankment, stopping right in front of the utterly humiliated corporate director. "Randall," Martha said coldly, "get off my dirt right now, Thomas." Martha Higgins proved that sometimes the slickest corporate technology is absolutely no match for a family's sheer willpower and some heavy, rusted American steel. The Earthbreaker didn't just save Oak Haven, it shattered the greed of Omnicrop Holdings forever. If this incredible, true-to-life story of grit, determination, and farming drama made your heart race, don't leave just yet. Smash that like button to honor the unstoppable spirit of generations of farmers. Share this video with your friends, drop a comment below on what you thought of Martha's ultimate victory, and hit subscribe for more thrilling real-life underdog stories. Keep grinding.